Welcome to Human Tech, a podcast about the intersection of humans and technology. My name is Guthrie, and I'm here with Susan. Hello, Susan.
Hello.
And this week we have a very special guest. Blay Whitby is here all the way from the UK. Hello, Blay.
Hello.
He is a philosopher, specifically being concerned with the, ethics of technology. I think that's fair to say. We're really excited to have him on and talk about what we were talking right before we went on air, and he was just saying how he thought that basically he was going to be the only person in the world who would care about this, and all of a sudden now it does appear to be all the rage, especially with AI and worries about technology. So, how did you manage to end up in this field at all?
Oh, well, it's simple, really. I think when I was a teenager, I was interested in philosophy and assembling engines, and at university, I studied philosophy, politics, and economics at Oxford, sort of standard degree for this country. And I learned to fly in the Oxford and University Air Squadron, and I continued rebuilding lots of engines for my university friends. So it's simply a question of finding a job that could combine an interest with technology and philosophy, particularly moral philosophy. I more or less made up the subject on my own, I think. It's quite interesting that there's a lot of interest in AI and ethics now, because I find myself at conferences sometimes yawning and sometimes saying, well, actually, I published a code of conduct for artificial intelligence and a whole book on the subject back in 1988. I don't know whether that's a clever thing to say or that just makes people think I'm old and past it. But are we still connected?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe it's a Skype noise. Yeah, so I've kind of been in the field from the beginning. And as I was saying, I thought it would be pretty lonely at first. But it turned out that a technology ethicist was very useful in terms of attempting to teach ethics to computer science undergraduates. And I have a lifetime of doing that as well.
So, for those for our listeners who maybe are not familiar with the field, what would you say? What is computer ethics, or the ethics of technology? What's a nice little summary of what that is?
I wish I could give an easy summary, but first of all, there's a whole new range of problems that technology has introduced. There's a whole class of crimes now that you can't commit without a computer, particularly virtual offences. Some of them are parallel to old crimes. So if you hack into a politician's emails, for example, that's parallel. That's a crime that could be committed in the days of paper. You'd have to open envelopes and so on. But some of them, particularly virtual offences, and I'm just writing a paper on virtual rape and so on. Some of these virtual offences really are new offences. I guess the theme I've taken through the decades has been that people actually working with the technology, by which I mean programmers, their managers, the managers of tech companies and so on, need to take responsibility. They need to work out the ethics. So that's kind of a parallel to what happens in medicine, for example, where no one doubts that there's medical ethics, but generally speaking, it's driven by medics, and they set standards for their profession. It's true that there are ethics committees with lay members, and I served on many ethics committees, and indeed set up ethics committees for tech companies, and lay members are very important. But I would like to see the IT profession see itself as a profession and drag up its own standards a great deal.
So, so I'm a attorney over here in the States, and there's of course lots of ethics when it comes to lawyers, and we have to take tests. And the state of Illinois has said that I'm an ethical person, but all the laws are made. You know, you would assume that the ethics rules would be made by some sort of government entity. But all the rules are just made up by the legal community. They just decide what's ethical for lawyers, and then usually the Supreme Court of each state, not the United States Supreme Court, but just the Supreme Court of each individual state, determines, oh, okay, we will accept these rules. But yeah, they basically self-govern themselves. But I guess in the tech community, there's no sort of formal governing body, really.
There have been attempts, and staying in the States, the ACM publishes a wonderful code of conduct for programmers, system designers, and so on. The problem is that there's no requirement to be professionally qualified in the field.
Right.
There's a tradition in computing of, well, I call them gifted amateurs, but sometimes my computer scientist colleagues look at me and say I've been too generous in calling them gifted. But the field is immature in some ways, and a lot of people still see them as, or a lot of people in IT still see themselves as rebels, as breaking down rules, as doing things differently. And I think sort of after 50 or 60 years, the profession needs to.
So can you give an example, Blay, of something that you feel is either being ignored or actually, actions are being taken that are not ethical, that would be addressed if the people, if IT professionals had a code of ethics, knew what it was, used it? Like, what would be different? Can you give an example of that?
Yeah, I can give you an example. And it's good to have a lawyer in on this conversation. Because lawyers have a role to play. From the aviation side, I want to hold them at a distance in some areas, but they clearly have a role to play in this. IBM's Watson, that won Jeopardy,
Right.
It's a great technical achievement. But of course, IBM didn't do it just to prove a point. They're commercializing it as Dr. Watson. And I have a number of problems there. And one of the problems I have is this vision of a doctor who's trained for a long time, for at least 8 years, to get her qualifications. She knows all about ethics. She's taking responsibility for the patient in front of her. And she knows that if she doesn't, consequences will follow. If she makes a mistake, she'll have to pay for it. But then she's taking advice from a handheld, a tablet of some sort in front of her with Dr. Watson on it, taking advice from a program written by gifted amateurs. And if there's something wrong with that, they will face no consequences. It's very rare that programmers are prosecuted for inadequate work.
Sure.
There isn't even a legal framework for saying what inadequate work would be. And of course, the more we go down this route, the more danger there is. But what I say to my medical students is, think about this for a minute. If there's a mistake, if there's an extra zero on a dose that the AI device is recommending, the only person who can spot that is a trained medical professional who's actually alert and saying, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. The minute management say, well, we can now de-skill this operation, we can give it to somebody with a lower level of training, the mistakes won't be spotted. But to me, it's the contrast between the people writing this code who are just basically, working in the Wild West, of the IT world, and then putting it into the hands of a trained medical professional who has all sorts of professional responsibility and ethical responsibility, and of course she will face the law if she gives a wrong dose. I mean, am I betraying my worry about this? I mean, I'd like the IT profession to, maybe they can't be exactly like the medical profession, but they could certainly move up the ethical ladder a bit now.
So in the United States, I think the biggest current place this will shake out is with driverless cars, because you have you're in an automobile that's being driven autonomously by software that was developed by a large company, and if there is an accident, someone has to be at fault and someone has to pay for the accident, right? Now of course, usually that'll be covered by the insurance companies. I don't know exactly how your auto insurance works over in the UK, but right? So the police department will determine who was at fault in the accident, and then they or their insurance company will has to pay the cost. But so who's at fault when a car being driven autonomously hits another car? Is it the person who was driving the car? Is it the company who developed the AI? Is it the car manufacturer? There currently are basically no rules. And so I think politicians are scrambling to codify something quickly before this, because right now it's kind of the wild, wild west, as it were.
It is indeed the Wild West. I have a paper on this ready to go, and I take a rather different attitude. I think driverless cars are a good idea as an ethicist. There are jobs that I don't think we should give to robots, and intimate companion is one of them. There's one of my most popular papers is "Do You Want a Robot Lover?" and that's an area I've got a lot of reservations about. But driving cars is something that humans really are very bad at. They're killing an awful lot of people, and driverless cars would reduce that death. And I've talked to a number of companies about this. I must be careful what I say because I've signed a lot of non-disclosure agreements. But I get the general impression that manufacturers, and particularly at least one large US AI company, are ready to go with this. They think the technology is good enough to sell, and they want the legal and ethical details cleared up. And what I suggest in the paper is to look at the aviation world. There will be accidents with driverless cars. There's no doubt about it. They should be investigated by an independent authority who seek to find the cause and make recommendations, not to attribute blame. Now, I've already said it's good to have a lawyer here. I don't want to give driverless cars exemption from the law or from blame, because clearly a manufacturer can produce a defective product and should face legal consequences. Programmers can do a bad job and should face legal consequences. So, I don't want the law pushed out of the area altogether, but I would like to see a no-fault pattern of investigation to work out what went wrong. Of course, the price of this and what's got me shown the door from a number of large companies is that we can't have commercial secrecy. If there is an accident, then the investigators must have the technical competence and the legal authority to look at every detail of that driverless car, including how the program performed in the particular circumstance that led to the accident, and then make a recommendation that would stop a similar accident happening again. And I have to say that I'm not generally impressed with the ethics of the IT world, and they do seem to put commercial secrecy of their software ahead of ethics in this case. So
I am not surprised at all. That
But are you saying, Blay, that the aviation industry. The whole investigating of airplane accidents would be a good model to follow. That's different. That it doesn't put the secrecy of corporate secrets above the safety investigation protocols.
That's exactly what I'm saying, Susan. It's a very good model. And I mean, it's not perfect, and it does produce some tensions. I'm actually experiencing one. First remove here. There was a terrible crash at an air show just over a year ago, right here in Brighton. I was a close-up witness. A vintage jet hit a roadway and killed 11 innocent people. And there's a long and detailed investigation and a certain amount of tension because the local police want to prosecute the pilot, who rather miraculously survived. And I have to say that would seem fair because I watched it and it wasn't a particularly good piece of flying. But the Air Accident Investigation Branch of the Civil Aviation Authority, and it's very similar in the United States. The administration of these investigations, completely independent body, won't hand over its investigation to the police. Refuses to do this, and I mean this is an important thing to stress. They really do investigate on a no blame basis. And one of the reasons I'm stressing this is because a very unethical film called Sully has just been released, which does the absolute wicked thing of suggesting the investigators are trying to attribute blame. And that's not how aviation investigation works. I mean, these people are typically ex-pilots who say, we just want to know what happened. We won't talk to the police. Whatever you say is in confidence. And that's how the investigation works. So I would...
And I know, Blay, you've got a fair amount of experience with the whole aviation, I believe, because the reason I know who you are is from a talk, we were both giving talks at a conference in the UK, and the talk you gave was on human factors in aviation accidents, which, by the way, was just a fantastic talk. Really enjoyed it. So we've talked so far here about technology, but I just wanted to mention you've got a pretty strong background in that whole, aviation world as well.
Yeah, one of the courses I'm teaching currently is the aviation model in medicine to medical students, and it's kind of, again, when I started that was new, but now a lot of people have published, and there's a lot again of ex-pilots training doctors in techniques that have worked to reduce aviation accidents, sharing what they've got, which will help to reduce medical accidents. So I wouldn't praise the aviation model if it wasn't for the fact that it's actually worked. It's actually made aviation pretty safe, or at least if we talk about scheduled airline flights, it's achieved a tremendous degree of safety. And I kind of think road users deserve that degree of safety as well. And driverless cars are a technology that can offer it.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So the way things are shaping up in the United States, if local governments do not take action, is that if there's an accident between a driverless car and another person and anything, right? The entity that will have to pay to fix all the things is the driver. So
the driver of the driverless car.
Correct, right? So yeah, no. I mean, you laugh, but the way it works is the way the laws are.
Driver.
No, but there is a driver. The way the laws are structured is that if you are on the roadway with a car you own, you are responsible for the safety of that automobile. And that's exactly the problem. The laws were not written to have the idea of a driverless car, and there are a lot of different. It's not when we say driverless, we're thinking completely autonomous. But even right now, we're driving somewhat autonomous cars that brake automatically, that have detection and side, if there's a car on the side. And so, and in fact, in many of the laws, so for example, I believe in California, the law is, even so Google is driving around with autonomous vehicles in California, but the way the law works, all autonomous vehicles must have a steering wheel, must have brakes and gas, must have a manual override, so if anything happens, and there must be someone sitting in the driver's seat. And because of all these things, right, it is, even though the car is being driven, driverlessly, according to the law, it's the person driving, quote unquote, who is responsible. So if there is an accident, the person who has to fork over the $40,000 to fix their car plus the other car, or maybe even more if there's any kind of medical damages. Again, the way it works in the States is if I hit someone with my car, I am liable for my car and their car and all of their medical bills. So in the aviation industry, if there's an accident, who pays the cost? Well, it's the big, the company that owned the aircraft. Because the driver is an employee, he's not doing it personally, right? So everything can be done by this big company. But as it currently stands in the United States, all the costs have to be incurred by the individual. And so if we go the aviation model, which I think is a great idea, the governments would have to pass some sort of law, but then you'd basically be asking the automotive industry to pay for all the accidents in the United States, a cost which they are currently not doing. And I imagine they would fight that tooth and nail.
Yeah, I think the insurance companies are an important player in this too. You see, airlines are insured, heavily insured, and I think the sellers, designers, and producers of autonomous vehicles would need to be insured, and because there will be claims. It's a shame that we can't build the legal and insurance structure to use this technology quite as quickly as we can use the technology.
Yeah.
But I'm not totally pessimistic about it. I mean, I have to say to you, Guthrie, U.S. lawyers aren't all totally conservative, and some of these cases will come to court, and some of these issues can be resolved in court. Things need to change, but the law can change and clearly needs to change on this. Although, my original point that the IT industry needs to be much more like the medical profession and to take responsibility for its creations, that still stands, I think, because, if you were involved in a case following an automobile accident that involved a driverless car, I mean, you would be quite interested in the standards of programming that were employed and how rigorously it was tested.
Especially if the fault is of the driver, right? Like in the one time out of a billion, which is way better than whatever humans can do. But in that one time out of a billion when something does go wrong.
Yeah. And I think, again, the court should have the right to look and say, how well did you test this code? Did you perform to the normal, to the recognized standards of the industry? I mean, this is happening. It's not unknown. I have friends who are called as professional witnesses, again, as academic computer scientists, and invariably what they're asked in court was this work to the usual standards of the industry? And I suppose they rightly say, well, the usual standards of the industry aren't frankly that good. But it is possible to write reliable code. It is possible to test your code properly. Again, I've signed way too many agreements to give examples, but sure. I feel a lot of companies release code, release software, because and they think consumers want it, it's whizzy and effective, and they don't care too much that it's not reliable.
So,
And
what would? Oh,
I
go
guess
ahead.
we as consumers have got this attitude that we don't care too much that it's not reliable. No, networks go down and so on, which is okay for a word processor. It's possibly okay for email, but it's not okay for a life support system, and it's not okay for a driverless car. It's not okay for software that's controlling an electricity distribution network and things like that. The industry needs to recognize that higher professional standards are required, and that it should enforce them.
Well, I love your comment from earlier, Blay, about, this idea that technology and code and software, it's innovative. There's the rebel aspect, and I don't even know. It's interesting. I haven't stopped to think about whether the people that do the work, if you talk about the tech industry, that's such a huge cross section of people these days, right? Because you've got, the people who are actually writing the code, and then you've got people who are managing the project, and then you've got the large corporation, whose project it is. And so I don't know if we can lump all those people together, but there was, this history, right, of it being new and innovative and rule breaking. And I mean, I haven't worked on a tech standards project real recently, but I used to do, a lot of those, not necessarily coding standards, but, interface design standards. And, just all the chafing at the idea that there would be standards, right? Or there would be a standard process by which things would be done. And I know that in the, oh, wow, I think maybe the early 2000s, there was some improvement on that here in the States, because the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, said that if you were creating a medical device or software for a medical device, you had to prove that you had gone through, for instance, a user-centered design process. You had to, prove that you had followed best practice for design, and that was, quite new and innovative when that came out. I don't think that has spread to many more industries over here where it's required, right? I mean, I think there's obviously a lot of people and a lot of companies that think that having standard processes and technical standards are a good idea, but I don't know, how much that's really done or enforced. And you're right? We've been creating tech stuff for a long time. Well, I don't think we can use the excuse anymore that it's so new. It's not possible to have standards. And I'm sure, in the aviation industry, although some things stay the same, they've got new equipment and new software, and they're still somehow able to come to some standards. And so I'd like to get your comment on that. But before I do that, I also have a question for you, which is, I teach a course every semester at University of Wisconsin in what's essentially a human technology interaction program within the computer science department. And I don't know, you have me thinking about whether in the computer science department where I'm teaching, there is even a course on ethics or, anything like this. I'm going to have to look up and see if there is. If there is, I'm not familiar with it. There might be, because I'm only an adjunct, so I'm not necessarily in on everything. But, do you, in the UK, is this taught regularly if one is getting an undergraduate tech degree?
The way it works universities, well, works may be a generous word here, but the way it's supposed to work is the BCS, which used to be the British Computer Society, it's now just BCS, the Chartered Institute for IT, will recognize certain degrees as a professional qualification, and they send a team to the university to see what the students are being taught and whether or not they'll acknowledge this degree as meeting their requirements. And they will insist, they'll insist on human-computer interface and on your area, whether the university or the students like it or not. They say that's something you've got to know. And they'll also insist on ethics and the students at least familiar with IT law. Because frankly, you work in the IT industry now, it's not the Wild West. There are laws, and it's very easy to break them. One of the reasons it's easy to break them is I think they're not very well founded laws. But there's also areas of dispute. At one university where I teach an ethics course, Imperial College in London, I get the students to form in their seminar groups, give presentations on recent issues, and of course Apple versus FBI on this, whether or not they'd help the FBI to hack into an iPhone just one time, proved a very popular topic, with an awful lot of students, in fact, siding with Apple on this, which is tough on the FBI, who do I think have a duty to see the contact list on the phone of a known terrorist. There were very much two sides to that story. But I mean, the idea that you could work in the IT industry and not have some awareness of ethics is kind of blown out the water, isn't it, by Apple versus FBI? You need to take a view as a professional. And I'm not really pushing people to take a view either side on that. I'm just saying there's a current issue in IT ethics. Do you want me to try and remember your question about about aviation now?
No, that's all right. Talk about, all right. So you kind of mentioned about AI and robotics and social interactions and ethics issues around that. And Guthrie and I, we have a talk that we give, which is called "The Future of Human Technology Interaction," and we, Guthrie, I don't know that we raise the ethics of it. Perhaps we should. We certainly raise the, I don't know, philosophical human issues, questions, of wait a minute, what do we want here? what do we want to have happen? But I'd love to have your ideas on the ethics issues or any other issues about AI and about social interactions with robots.
Yeah, well, let me give you one idea about that. I have to say that in all my talks and really what I write is I say, look, I'm not doing science fiction. I'm only talking about technologies that are either working in the lab or it's reasonable to assume that they'll be around in a couple of years.
Right.
And on this, on your talk on social interactions with robots, one thing that I got quite exercised about is smart homes for the elderly. And let me just give you the idea about this. If I look at the ACM Code of Conduct, or the BCS Code of Conduct, or most of the stuff written on computer ethics, and I have to take some blame for this, the normal assumption is that users are businessmen or women. That's, what does a user look like? Well, they're Susie the saleswoman or something like this. And of course, we're now introducing this technology with a very, very, very different classes of users. So in the case of smart homes, we're talking about elderly people with declining cognitive capabilities. And we're also, with robot nannies, we're looking at children. And the idea that, well, we interact with the user and they have certain things and we do this user-centered design. Well, now we're moving into an area where we've got vulnerable users, very vulnerable users, and maybe we have an ethical duty to protect them, or maybe we have an ethical duty, to insert a human into this rather than expect them to deal with a rather strange and alien technology. It's certainly a field I'd like to see discussed. And aside from documents where I've been in the room, I don't see the expression vulnerable users used a lot. But clearly, an infant, a very small child, a toddler in the care of a robot, and I defer to Guthrie here. It is illegal under European law to leave your child in the care of a robot, and I assume it would be in the United States.
Define
too. But I know that people will do it. Or it's not pessimistic to think that people will do this.
So in the United States, that kind of family law would be determined on a state-by-state basis, and we would have like child neglect. I know you can be charged, for instance, if you leave your child unattended in a hot car. If you left your child with a robot, I don't think in a lot of states it would be a crime, depending on the length and depending on how well the robot was being taken care of. Susan, you might know more than I.
Oh, well, I'm not the lawyer, so
I do not specialize in family law. So
I'm assuming, this is a total assumption, not based on any fact, that if you leave your child with a robot, you've left your child without supervision. Because
really?
I would think supervision in most definitions is being supervised by
it depends on the robot,
competent adult human. But that's a great question.
I don't think there's anything. I think in the United States it is a subjective, what is competent, right? Like, is the robot competent enough to provide care? Blah blah blah.
Wow, we're gonna. Have to find out.
But there's certainly not anything, especially on a federal level, as far as I know,
that says you can't.
That says you can't do that. Yes.
Yeah, but I just can't imagine that a robot would be considered a. But that's now you got me curious. I'm gonna have to find out if this is happening anywhere. But yeah, Blay, really interesting question about that. So that's one. Continue on with the idea of ethical issues of like what about with the elderly or someone who has dementia and that kind of thing.
Well. All I can say is I'm surprised everybody isn't discussing this because the technology is there. We can do some pretty clever things now with smart homes. I guess it's being built. I've spoken to companies in the area, and again, rather like the driverless vehicle manufacturers, they say, we need some guidance. We need a legal framework for this. It's a technology that brings certain advantages. If you conduct a survey and say to people, would you like us to develop AI technology that will enable you to remain independent and in your own home for longer, they tend to say yes. If you ask the question, would you like to be cared for by a robot in your old age, they tend to say no. And there's crucial things we don't know. And I think even Susan doesn't know about this interface. We need more research. We don't really know the psychological effects of having children brought up by robots. So we've got this technology. It'll be interesting. People are building robot nannies right now. You can get them if you want. We're hazy on the legal position, We're certainly hazy on the ethical position. I think we're hazy on the psychological position too. I don't know that it's a good idea. And I suppose busy parents will say better the robot than the television, or better the robot than nothing. At least the robot can call me on my smartphone if there's a problem. There are advantages to it. And again, better the old person in a smart home than in a regular home and having accidents and hurting themselves, poisoning themselves, or having a fall and nobody notices. But again, the technology is sweeping ahead. We haven't really had any serious debate on the limits of this. And as I say, the codes don't say much about vulnerable users. And the people writing the software for the vulnerable users, in my experience, have really not much of a clue about vulnerable users, and they're unhappy to have a psychologist come in and advise them, because that's not how they work.
So in the United States, when it comes to elderly people, this is going to happen. We don't have a national health service. When you are in advanced age, over 65 in the United States, you do get essentially free healthcare through Medicaid, but it only covers when you're sick. It does not cover home care for the vast majority of cases. There is simply no money to take care of many elderly people in the United States. That's just the reality of the situation. And so anything that can be done to bring the cost of long-term care, which is how I was taught to define and anything regarding a nurse, for anything from help around the house to a nursing home is long-term care, versus like chemotherapy would be short-term care. That is not covered by any insurance. It's not covered by the government. It's basically covered by the pockets of those who care about that person. And so anything to bring that cost down, anything at all, will be gobbled up immensely. So if you can get a robot to help with some of that and decrease, the cost by 20%, 30%, even if the quality then also decreases, is going to explode in the United States.
Not just the United States. The position you've described is not really any different in Britain. There isn't enough money to pay for social care. And in fact, that makes a problem for the NHS in that people are admitted, they could be discharged from hospital, but the hospital can't discharge them because there's nowhere to discharge them to, or in their opinion, they're not safe at home. So we have the problem of so-called bed blockers, which is a big problem for the NHS. Japan, Germany, a lot of countries have exactly the same problem. And robots in elder care is coming. And again, I feel it's like driverless vehicles. There's so much we need to sort out in terms of the insurance and legal position. And also the design and programming of this equipment. It needn't actually be a physical robot. It could be a smart home that monitors the person inside. It's so easy to do with today's technology. In fact, you can monitor what goes into a fridge and what comes out by simply reading the barcodes or RFID tags on things to know a person's diet, and simply to make warnings if it's not right. You can monitor temperature everywhere. You can monitor the temperature of bath water and so on, monitor the temperature that comes out of taps, and you can put CCTV on people. This is all today's technology. Well, I'm surprised I'm not called in as an ethicist on how to do this, because it's really doable, and I don't think the FDA have laid down any standards for it, and now's the time to do it, surely. Now's the time to have standards.
The one thing that could work, that could go a long way, that I don't think companies will do, and I had this thought back when we were talking about cars, though you could apply it in a lot of different situations. If you're a company and you sell a car, you could make the whole thing work and be very ethical about it by simply indemnifying the user, except for, cases of, intentional, damage. Basically, you say, if there's an accident, we, the company, will take the liability. We'll handle it. We'll pay for the damage. They're never going to do that, but that would be a very fast, easy fix for someone like a Tesla to do, to kind of move the whole industry.
Yeah. In a way, I think it's a federal responsibility. I mean, I can't see the current administration seeing it this way, but 30,000 people a year die in the United States in automobile accidents. I'm not the only person who makes this rough guess. I think that could be brought down to 3,000 people a year. So we're talking about saving 27,000 lives by introducing this technology. That's a general benefit to every citizen of the United States. So it would be fair to say every citizen of the United States should, through the federal government, indemnify drivers and manufacturers. And, I'm not saying manufacturers shouldn't be prosecuted if they've done a poor job, because that's where we need the lawyers. But the technology should go ahead simply for the lives that it said. This is basically the theme of my paper. How can you justify killing all those people simply because you can't build the insurance and legal machinery to introduce this technology? Does that make sense to you? It makes sense to me.
It makes a lot. Yes, it makes perfect sense to me.
So I would think, Blay, that you're, because you made the comment a moment ago about, you're surprised that more companies haven't brought you in to work on some of this. And I was, as we've been talking, I've been working on the assumption that given that, I don't know anyone but you, and I'm sure there are people, but I don't know them, who are, would call themselves technology ethicists, that you must be very busy, because I don't think there are a lot of you. But either I could be wrong, because maybe like it was many years ago with human factors work, although there was a big need for it, the people who were creating the products didn't know or didn't think they needed it, or maybe there's already plenty of people doing this. What's your take on how much technology ethics work is going on with these new technologies and the companies? Is there now be a huge demand for people who can do this work? And thirdly, how does one go about, becoming a technology ethicist and doing the work?
No, you've hit me with a load of questions. I don't
just
know
a
the
few
answers
easy
to.
questions for you.
These are all things I don't really know. And in spite of actually approaching some large companies, I'm not particularly in demand as a technology ethicist. And in case you're interested in the bottom line, I should say that ethics work, unlike human factors work, really, ethics work is traditionally done for free, because any exchange of money would create a conflict of interest. And conflict of interest is something we're bothered about as ethicists. And I'm sure that's something that will be discussed with the new president of the United States, the notion of conflict of interest. And I'm sure you can see how paying your ethics committee might be seen as not the way to go. So usually I'm offering my services for free. But even so, there's surprising lack of interest. And a number of companies screaming, well, we're complying with the law. And me screaming, well, the law is hopelessly out of date in this area. The law's not really being much of a guide. And we talked through some technologies where, the law is out of date. I mean, particularly with the driverless cars, and Tesla's a good example. Tesla say quite clearly, you can turn on the autopilot system on the car and it'll do all sorts of wonderful things, but you've got to remain alert and take over because you're driving, basically. You're responsible. You know, our autopilot system is just for your amusement. Don't take your hands off the steering wheel. They literally say, don't take your hands off the steering wheel in the owner's manual. And while that law remains in place, driverless cars are being held back. People are being killed by drunk drivers. That doesn't have to happen if we could just change on this. So how much of it is going, how much technology ethics is going on? I really have the feeling, and again, you know, I feel these non-disclosure agreements weighing down on me, but I've spoken to some large companies in the area, and I have a very unhappy feeling. The only way I can characterize it for you guys and for your listeners is it feels like 1881 Tombstone, that a lot of the IT industry does feel like the Old West, where it's not that there's no law, but a lot of people feel that, you know, like the Earp brothers, they can walk down the street, push the local sheriff out the way, and deal with it themselves. There's a lot of that going on. It also feels, and it's interesting that UX Brighton conference, there were a lot of women represented there, a lot of women speakers and so on. But the IT profession, to me, still feels male-dominated.
It is.
And that it's got that in common with Tombstone 1881. It's a very male-dominated society. And even when women go into it, and some very competent women go into it and do very well, and let's be honest about this, they know, even when you speak from them as undergraduates, they know they're going into a male-dominated industry and they compensate for it. So it doesn't feel to me like the IT industry as a whole, you know, Silicon Valley and these big US companies and the little AI companies in Britain, all of them, they still feel a lot like the Wild West to me. Does that capture it?
Yeah, I think it does. I have another question I wanted to get to, which is a little bit of a change of subject. You seem to have reservations. So the general, I feel like the consensus is the wrong word. There's been a movement towards an acceptance that the future of AI and the future of robotics has a place for intimate companionship, be it relationship-y or sexual, either way, with robots and in software. You I think you alluded to earlier rejecting this assumption. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm very much in favor of what AI can do. I'm very much in favor of what robots can do. I think there are some wonderful jobs for robots. But when it comes to intimate companionship, people really need to think about what they're giving up. And if we talk about the robot lover, my paper on robot love, which grew out of just being asked to speak at an art festival here in Brighton and so on, but it's now in an MIT collection on robot ethics. A number of things worry me. One of the main things that worries me, and here's where some philosophical training comes in, is you might think you have a clear idea of what love is, but over philosophical time, it's changed out of all recognition. So the earliest work, or one of the earliest written works that we know about, is Plato's Symposium. And Symposium is an all-male drinks party. It's not really an academic gathering. And in Plato's Symposium, they famously, they send the flute girls away and discuss philosophy instead, and they discuss what is love. I can't say to be broadcast what conclusions they come to. I simply say it's a classical book, it's available online, and so on. If I were to publish it, people would burn my house down because we take a very different view now. But it's interesting to see what was considered love in classical Athens. And you might say, well, that has no effect in the modern world. Yes, it does. If you've heard of a platonic relationship, then there's an idea straight out of the Symposium, although the way we use platonic now is not precisely the way Plato uses it in the original text. As always, you must read the original text here. And then the Christian Church defined love to suit a very different agenda. So the type of love there, and then romantic love emerges from really, I guess, its biggest flowering in the Renaissance. And then modern writers write on love in some intriguing and different ways. But the point I'm making here is it's something that has changed meaning a lot over human history. And I think if people talk about being in love with a robot, then the meaning of love will change again. Is that good? Is that bad? Well, it's really something you want to think about, because the love you might have for a life partner who's, another human being, equal or equal-ish, we can go through details there, and has all manner of moral and legal rights in virtue of being a human, very different from the love you might feel for a robot, which is a wholly owned piece of property. However wonderful they are technology, it's a wholly owned piece of property, and may very well, like your iPhone, like your smartphone, be sending intimate information about you back to some large US corporation as a condition of it. And again, there are ethical questions about, at what point should it tell the FBI what you're saying in bed? This seems a very different sort of relationship. Now, you might want to go in that way, but as a society, we need to ask about this. Do you want to carry on talking about it?
Yeah. Well, I'll just say, what you said. I have a couple of things that maybe I hadn't thought of came to mind. So one, yes, it's an owned piece of property. So two, so it could report to the FBI. In the United States, we have basically anything that you tell a spouse in confidence is, and maybe this is probably the same way in right, you cannot use in any kind of criminal proceeding. That's and usually civil proceedings too, with some rules and exceptions. Does that apply to robot relationships? Almost certainly not. That's one. Two, I had the thought of so you have an artificial intelligence software partner, and it's like your fourth year of being together, and they know the software knows everything about you, and you've developed this amazing bond. And then you get an email saying, if you'd like to continue using the software, pay $5,000. Otherwise, we will end what's essentially, one of your close friends. So that, pay for access, that could be a little dangerous.
The scope for IT companies to be very unethical is big in this area, isn't it? Which is another worry I have. I have to say, there's small worries. There's a movement in this country to ban sex robots on the basis that this teaches people, particularly men, to treat their sexual companions as objects, and therefore should be resisted. So that's another question of, are we going in the right direction? But I also have to say there's a lot of enthusiasts for this technology who stopped inviting me to their conferences. Their chief argument is there's lots of people who, for one reason or another, can't find sexual companionship. So what's wrong with building them, a robot to provide this intimate companionship? And I'm afraid I don't see that people's social problems are necessarily something that technology should be thrown at. So you're putting in a robot to do a dangerous job, and all credit to, was it Philae landed on a comet on a one-way trip to the sun, but Curiosity that's exploring Mars right now. There are robots doing wonderful jobs for us, and I'm not against robots. But the idea that someone can be so rejected by society that they can only find solace with their robot, maybe that's a social problem. Maybe we ought to, be nicer to these people. And we also ought to consider the possibility, what happens when the majority of people don't step outside their front door to deal with the nasty, complicated world of other human beings because they've got a robot companion provided by a large US corporation, as you say, knows all their thoughts and desires and can tell them exactly what they want to hear. That, in fact, in AI terms, that is not difficult. And if you want your companion to be nasty to you on occasion, I can write the code to do that too. This is not a challenge. In fact, humans, there's some wonderful experiments showing that humans attribute way too much emotional capacity to things that don't feel it. Well, I'll come back to what humans do, because that's another ethical worry I have. So it looks to me like we've got a social problem, and we're going to throw a technology at it, which will be very profitable for some. But society as a whole should say, do we really want this? And before I finish on this, when I ask myself what sort of person would want a robot lover, the most obvious answer, I'm sorry to say, is people who want to do things to it that would be illegal or immoral if they were to do them to a human being. That's why people want a robot. And again, how do we feel about that? Shall I talk about humans being susceptible to emotional manipulation?
Sure.
I mean, it sounds a terrible thing to say, but it's not really. And the research I'd point you at was done by Scheutz and Maller. That's SCHEUTZ and MALLE at Tufts in, I think, 2014 or 2013, where they asked psychology undergraduates to instruct a robot to knock down a tower of bricks, and gave them a sheet of instructions that the robot could understand. This is a commercially available robot, a little Now robot, nothing special, no great program. But unfortunately, what the psychology students didn't know was that a robot would protest. And it protested by reciting canned text. Again, it's nothing terribly sophisticated in the AI programming here. The robot said, please don't make me knock down that tower. It took me 2 hours to build it. I really don't want to knock down that tower. And then it pretended to cry. Or it was programmed to adopt a pose that would look like a bit like crying if it were done by a human being. And about 98% of the students didn't make the robot knock down the tower. And when they interviewed them afterwards, the students said, well, the robot was crying. Nobody wants to see a robot crying. And most of them tried to negotiate with it, in spite of having in their hands a piece of paper saying it could only understand these 6 commands. And I think it's a lovely little piece of research. And it's not particularly original, because Cynthia Brazil at MIT did a lot of work with Kismet, which again demonstrated the vulnerability of humans to simulated emotional display, even when the humans knew that it was just a simulation, that it was just a mechanical trick.
I'm fascinated by this kind of research. One of the things, Blay, we have found when we have given that talk I mentioned before on the future of human technology interaction. So we have a point in that talk where we show a video of Guthrie, Boston Dynamics, I think, is the company that makes, which is now owned by Google, I believe.
Oh, they're trying to
and they make
sell
these.
it.
Pardon, Guthrie?
Oh, no, I was just saying that Boston Dynamics may not be a thing very long.
But there's this robot in the video that is picking up a box and moving it to another location. And as part of the video, to show how, I assume, to show how adaptive the robot can be in any obstacles it encounters, there's a person that continually knocks the box out of the robot's hands or pushes the robot away from the box. And what's interesting when we show this video is the instant reaction. And we're talking about 1,000 people in the room, right? And people just are like, oh, like they feel bad for the robot, and this is not a robot that, it does have kind of legs and arms and a head, but it's not a robot that is showing any kind of emotional reaction. But this ability, or not even ability, but this response I think humans have, which is, the whole anthropomorphization, we just assume that this other thing that somehow unconsciously reminds us of a human is going to feel bad. Because I would feel bad if someone kept knocking a box out of my hand or someone pushed me. And so this robot must feel bad, which I guess is I'm glad to see that empathy is so automatic, but I think it does raise some really interesting questions about, what are these interactions going to consist of, and do we know, do we have any clue as to the landscape of what is going to be transpiring? And I don't think we really understand. I think it's really interesting, and I don't know that we're gonna. I don't know that we're gonna be able to stop it, because there's huge amounts of money involved, and if there's a lot of money, that usually it's hard to stop. But I'm fascinated with the whole psychology, social science, behavioral science aspect of relationships with technology.
I think we're going to see pets first. We're going to see, remember Tamagotchis? Did they ever get Tamagotchis?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. That was, a hot little thing. That's just a little piece of software. I think we'll see AI pets first that, is on your PC and on your smartphone, and, you play with, and it barks back and it does different stuff. And I think that's where it will start. And someone will make a lot of money.
Oh yes, there's immense profits to be made in this, but I would encourage Susan to stay interested and look at that research at Tufts, because as an ethicist, I'm immensely worried. This gives a tremendous opportunity to exploit humans.
Yeah.
My feeling when Matthias Scheutz gave a paper and announced the research was that, the 2% who just carry on and make the robot knock down the pile of bricks and don't care are the 2% at the extreme end of the psychopaths spectrum. We know there are some humans who honestly don't care about others, but most humans have this tremendous feeling of empathy, and it's so easy to tap into it. This robot doesn't even look like a human.
Yeah.
It has 2 arms, 2 legs, and big eyes.
Right.
Japanese manufacturers are very clever the way they play the other side of the uncanny valley and so on. But there's no doubt that even Siri or Cortana or what's Alexa could easily be programmed to get under people's skin. And there's no law about that. There's nothing to stop manufacturers doing it. There's nothing to. There's not even any guidance. There's not even any guidance from to work to. And again, people could call me, but they don't.
Maybe they will if they listen to our podcast. Well, Blay, this has just been fascinating conversation. I appreciate so much you're coming on and talking to us about this. If people want to learn more, what do you have, 1 or 2 suggestions for what they should read or where they should go or what they should do if they're like, wait a minute, I can't let this go. I've got to learn more about this.
Oh dear. Well, I was taken with a number of other robotics experts in 2010 to a country house on a retreat where we had to come up with a code of conduct for robot builders, a sort of Asimov's 3 laws for the 21st century. And that's published. It's published by the EPSRC, which I think stands for the Engineering, Physics and Science Research Council, as guidance for robotics. Unfortunately, we've covered so many areas that I can't recommend one book. Now, I've published a few books on the ethics of AI. I'll answer email questions, although I have a pretty busy teaching load coming up. I'm preparing a book on the aviation model in medicine, but again, medicine has heard a lot about the aviation model. On this stuff about humanoid robots and robot lovers, there's a paper in Lin, Beakey and Abney edited Robot Ethics published by the MIT Press a few years ago. There's a paper called Do You Want a Robot Lover?
Well, maybe what we'll do, Guthrie, is compile some of these and just put them. I usually write a blog post when we publish a podcast episode, so I can put some of these references in that blog post for people.
I guess what's intriguing is we're talking about contemporary technology. I mean, driverless cars are not long in the future, or robot nannies, or
and whenever we give a talk, we always say, this isn't some far out. This is basically because when people say what's happening, like quote now, they're really talking about next year, because what's happening right now is we have driverless cars. We have, these things already exist. It's just a matter of deployment.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting, we're talking about contemporary technologies, stuff that's around now, and saying, well, there hasn't been much discussion of the ethics. I don't know where you'd go to find about the ethics. No one's talking about it, which is, I guess, one of the reasons I'm quite worried.
Yeah, that it's already here, and we're not even talking about the ethics of it.
Yeah, who's talking about when it's right and when it's wrong to mistreat a robot or have a robot companion? Do you want a robot lover as opposed to a human lover? Or do you want both? Who's talking about this? And yet the technology is there.
Blay, thanks so much for joining us. And
wait, Blay.
What? Yeah.
Is there anything you'd like to plug?
No, not particularly. So,
okay. We always ask.
People call me and ask for ethics work. It's traditionally free, so it's not much in it for me. But I'm genuinely worried about these issues, and I'm surprised that more people aren't.
Blay, stay in touch with us.
Sure. Right now.
And I will just remind everyone before we sign off that if you like our podcast, please tell others about it and rate it and review it wherever you listen to podcasts. And thanks, everyone, for joining us. And, don't order that robot lover yet.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.
All right.